I'm delighted to welcome today Lord Mayor Sally Capp, the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, who's here to join us for the World City Summit Mayoral Dialogues. Lord Mayor Sally Capp has a distinguished career, firstly as a lawyer, then as an entrepreneur and a philanthropist, and most recently as a leader in the real estate industry, in place leadership and civic leadership. On May the 18th, 2018, she was elected as the Lord Mayor of the City of Melbourne. Welcome, Lord Mayor Sally Capp.
Thank you, Professor Greg Clark. You are always so warm in your introductions.
So, Lord Mayor, if we may, I want to ask you the most obvious question. Why and how did you become a city mayor? And what motivates you for this very important, but indeed very challenging role?
Well, two things for me is, one is the passion for our city and for the issues that our city was facing. So 3 years ago, there were a number of things happening in our city, both as an organisation and as a municipality, and I felt really passionate about those issues. And I think in these roles, certainly for me, you need to have that energy to really drive your efforts through a lot of barriers, through a lot of people who want to challenge and criticise. But if you've got the right passion and energy, I think that really helps drive you through, not least of which standing for public office is actually a really scary and difficult thing to do. The second element is a sense that we can make a difference. And from my perspective, after a long time in particularly the private sector, a sense that I could take what I had learnt, I could take my skill sets and use them in this role as mayor to really make a difference. That is also a key driver for me when I was considering becoming mayor, and every single day since I became mayor in 2018.
Well, Lord Mayor, it's wonderful to hear that you have this passion, this ambition, and this appetite for the job. And I'm sure that other mayors around the world will also be delighted to hear that it's also scary, because for many people, the degree of courage that a city mayor has to show in the face of multiple challenges is not something that everybody admits to, it has to be said. Now, Melbourne has a reputation for being a very resilient city. And I suppose what I'd really like to know now is, in what ways has Melbourne proved to be both resilient and agile during the pandemic? What have you done differently, and what innovations have already occurred?
Oh gosh, it's been such a time of disruption, but really being focused on how we can use this time as productively as possible to create change and make a difference has been a key focus for us. I think firstly, we've really looked to see flexibility and adaptability within our own team. We've had some parts of our organisation and the services we deliver have had to be completely shut down, particularly during lockdown. Our library services, recreation services, the sorts of provisions that we provide into our local communities basically had to stop. The flexibility of our team to either go into other roles or find ways of continuing to provide value was absolutely key. And I've got to acknowledge the efforts of our workforce in showing that flexibility to pirouette, as I like to call it, into new roles or new way of delivering services was remarkable, and I think really set a tone and a pace for what could be done across our community. It is that resilience and that sense of not being defeated. The second thing that's been remarkable is in the way that we actually approach new programs and situations, to be accepting of more risk, to be more experimental and explore different ways of doing things, has meant that we've adjusted to be able to deliver more quickly and more effectively, even in challenging environments. These are learnings and ways in which we work that are our innovations that we will take forward. And key to that has been doing pilots and trials. And I think in circumstances like this pandemic, where really we haven't had a rule book or a clear way forward, we haven't been able to rely on prior experience, that sense of trying things and being willing to take those risks to see if our responses will work and be effective. And if not, then try something else. But if so, keep doing those at scale and at pace. That's been terrific. We've seen unprecedented levels of cooperation across levels of government and across sectors. That's something I really hope doesn't change. When we combine our resources, when we set common goals and we really put our minds and efforts to it, we've shown extraordinary outcomes, one of which is one of the silver linings for our city, is that every single person rough sleeping was provided with a safe place to sleep each night, with food and with services each day. And that was something that was thought too complex, too difficult, too costly previously. And we've shown in a pandemic situation that when we work together, we can actually achieve great things. So I think innovation from that perspective is also something we don't want to lose.
Well, Lord Mayor, thank you very much. You're saying something very important here. Flexibility, experimentation, collaboration. It's almost as if the pandemic has been an exercise in flexing your muscles and creating new capacity. And it was particularly important, I think, to hear what you said about how the city has made sure that the most vulnerable people, those perhaps in the poorest and most disadvantaged communities, have been focused upon as the group of people that innovation really needed to serve. Let's move on to the next question, if we may. Melbourne already has a reputation for being a city that takes the global environmental challenge very seriously. And I know that you've been thinking about what the road to net zero should be like. So what are the opportunities for businesses and for innovators on that journey to net zero in Melbourne? And what do you think will be the most important changes and adaptations that need to be made to minimize and to tackle disruption over the next couple of years?
Look, there are so many elements to that question. And again, I'm an optimist, so I do like to look at these very challenging crisis situations and find ways that we can be positive about the experience as much as possible. And so much of the efforts and responses has shown that we can really, if we've got that dedication to progress, we can accelerate our agendas around items such as becoming a zero carbon city. During the pandemic, and we've had the longest continuous lockdown in the world here in Melbourne, not something I hope I'm talking about for too much longer. We're currently in lockdown again. In these circumstances, we've been really able to push forward with our agenda around responding to the climate crisis. We declared a biodiversity and climate change emergency some time ago now, but the work to respond to that, we've had an opportunity whilst the city was quiet to do some extraordinary things. So we've delivered 40 kilometres of protected bicycle lanes around our city, which is a program that we thought might take us even as long as 8 years to deliver in a busy, bustling city. Whilst our streets were quiet, we've pushed ahead with that program. And we've also created employment opportunities for people that may have otherwise been out of work. We've planted over the last 6 months 175,000 trees, shrubs and new grasses across this city to really add to our green canopy, to bring temperatures in our city down by cooling through vegetation. And also, of course, all of those efforts help us manage our stormwater impacts better across our city. And so another great achievement as a result of this time to actually accelerate. It does come, though, of course, with the needing that leadership and frankly that courage to step and lean into those agendas, to use this opportunity to achieve more than was anticipated in these short timeframes is something quite extraordinary. And I have to say that so many of the forums that I've been in with other mayors around the world and around Australia has really helped with that sense of drive and confidence to tackle some of these types of initiatives during a pandemic crisis, just seeing what others are doing. And one of the things I really appreciate about forums like this is that sense of camaraderie from learning from each other and that ability to really move forward at a pace.
Well, Lord Mayor, what a fascinating and important response. And to take your own words, it's been possible for you to pirouette towards this net zero agenda and this commitment, and to try to see it as a kind of dividend of the pandemic, that you can accelerate this approach. Now, I know that you recently announced that you'll be investing more than 60 million Australian dollars on expanding open space and on water management as part of the efforts to make the city both greener and more resilient. What role do you see for public space when it comes to a more sustainable urban future for Melbourne? I mean, this is part of Melbourne's DNA already, isn't it?
It really is. And I have to reflect back as well on this time, I think has really sharpened people's focus around their own priorities and their aspirations as individuals and what they want to see government do to reflect the community that reflects their beliefs and their values. I say that because we've just finished all of our community engagement to develop our council plan for the next 4 years. And in the top 2 priorities from our community and the breadth of our community was a response to climate change, and an urgent response to climate change. That really gives us the mandate to be able to move at a pace, to invest in the programs that we think will make a difference, and really to make sure that our public spaces are used in a way that reflect those aspirations. So just some examples of some of the things that we are doing. We've particularly looking towards the way that we can use our public spaces to support private sector and community adjusting to the use of renewable energy, for example. One aspect of that has been, and we are 100% renewable electricity here at the City of Melbourne. We still have a bit of work to go on other types of energy, but we've done really well on electricity. We know that 60% of the emissions in Melbourne come from existing commercial buildings and the way that they use energy. And so we're now looking at the way that we can use public spaces to deliver community scale batteries for the storage of renewable energy to help more of those buildings adjust to generating renewable energy and using more renewable energy in the way that their buildings operate. And we can do that by using some of our public spaces. We're also looking, as many other cities have done, at how we incorporate infrastructure for electric vehicle charging across our city, either in our own car parks or literally in the streets. We have so many residents that have no off-street capability to be able to put in private infrastructure for electric vehicles. So it's really important that we take the lead on making that infrastructure available. And then in terms of our parks and open spaces, they are literally the hearts and lungs of our city and our community. We've seen the use of those parks go up enormously, exponentially during COVID, and that's actually been maintained in terms of the use of and interactions in our public spaces going forward. We need to make sure that they are green, that they are well maintained, and that they are appropriate for maximising public use. But literally, they provide the oxygen and they provide the cooling for our city to keep pulsating and pumping, to use more words for this vision. And so for us, investing in the public spaces that we have, but also looking at pocket parks and other new major parks here in the city of Melbourne is key. And to do that, we're actually taking back, because we're all tight on land and space, we're doing it in two ways. We are buying land and converting existing buildings back to open space. That's the more expensive part of the program. But we're also taking back roads and turning roads into public spaces, urban linear parks, pocket parks, and extending existing parts by taking lanes of traffic away and turning them into green open spaces. So there's a little bit of an idea into what we're doing on public spaces here in Melbourne.
Well, Lord Mayor, this is absolutely inspiring, understanding how you can not just rediscover public space, as has happened in many cities during the pandemic, but also this approach you've taken to pocket parks, to shared spaces, to creating new public space where none existed before. And I'm sure that other mayors around the world will have been trying to do something similar. And once again, there are important lessons here from Melbourne for everyone. Now, I want to pick up on another theme with you, if we may. Melbourne is already known as a city with world-class universities, with great entrepreneurs, with a preference, if I may put it that way, towards technology-led industries, and of course the lifestyle and the talent that they need attracted to the city because of this amazing combination. You have already the Melbourne Innovation District, the City Lab, those world-class universities, and a very fertile business and startup ecosystem. So the question I have is not so much what creates that, but what's the role of city government in all of that? What is it that a mayor can do to empower entrepreneurship and drive innovation? What can Melbourne teach us about that?
Great question, and certainly something I think every city is thinking about at the moment. And there's going to be a real competition for investment and talent around these sorts of areas. From our perspective, there are two elements. One is how do we create the environment in which entrepreneurs and innovation can flourish? And the other one is what can we do as a major player in our city economy to really drive innovation. I'll start on that one first because it's been really interesting. There are two key elements I thought I'd just touch on. Firstly, for more than 40 years now, we've been collecting consistently the same data about land use and employment around our city, together with other data such as footfall, development, of course, all the standard sort of planning data. We've been collecting that and we've been using it internally. Over the last 2 years, we've made that data available on an open data platform for everyone to be able to use and use in a real-time way. Other councils have now come on board to share their data, which really adds to the depth and breadth and value of the data that's available for private sector organisations to use as they are looking at innovation and as they are growing their business and as they're trying to develop entrepreneurial approaches, whether it's to public issues, and we're running hackathons and incubators and innovation competitions constantly about how we can become a smarter city. So how can we use technology to drive smarter city outcomes? But frankly, every person that can use that data to drive value in the private sector is a bonus for us as well. So that open data platform has been key. We're also looking at the way that we procure and invest ourselves to deal with our own technology and new entrepreneurial approaches to issues. And whether that's an internal way that we can use data and technology better, or how we're delivering our services externally, we're taking the approach of becoming effectively a test bed ourselves, so that we can bring entrepreneurs and innovators in, and as they move through a process where we're identifying the best solutions for our needs, we actually then have resources ready to invest in those companies, in those ideas, to give them that opportunity to flourish using our resources. The next part was about an environment in which to flourish. That means we've got to make it really easy for people to do business here. We've got to make sure that there are ways in which they can collide and have serendipitous interactions that normally result in something fabulous, creative and innovative, and that we've got the right platforms to support particularly technological innovation. That's why we are the first local government in Australia to run a 5G test bed here, together with other local governments and 26 private industries. It's why we're working with our universities around an innovation district, so that we can see that collision of brilliance, of research and commercialisation, and we can put a focus onto organisations in that precinct to make sure they're receiving the right investment, the right attention and the right resources to be able to flourish. So that's a few ideas there.
So Lord Mayor, this is actually a fascinating answer, and thank you for taking the time to lay that out so carefully. I think what you've said, if I understood correctly, is that the city has to be firstly a good customer. It needs to know how to buy well from small businesses and to buy in ways that encourage innovation. And then you've said that it needs to be a good convener. The city needs to be able to bring together the various actors that need to be part of this and to get them, as it were, playing in the same orchestra. And then lastly, you've said the city needs to be a great curator of the space in which innovation happens, creating, as it were, literally the fertile ground upon which new businesses and new innovations can emerge. So it's absolutely fascinating. Now, when we think about places of innovation, Melbourne is already home to Australia's largest seaport. And that seaport, of course, is part of the DNA of the city that has given it this great global perspective and this way of approaching the whole world. Now, as you know, around the world, relationships between cities and ports vary in their degree of warmth, to put it mildly. So what is the role of the Port of Melbourne in creating this greener, more livable, more innovative city that you've been describing to us? And how is it that the city and the port will work together on that?
Well, an absolutely fascinating and very live issue for us here in Melbourne at the moment. I'm not sure, no, I don't have our Melbourne City flag behind me, but the City of Melbourne created about 185 years ago, of course, in the context of the longest continuous living culture in the world, here in Australia with our Indigenous culture. But the city established really on the basis of trade. And since then, the Port of Melbourne has continued to be the major hub, as you said, in Australia and in our region. We're very conscious of a number of things. At the moment, the really live question is how we can be more efficient on the transport of goods to and from that port when they've landed or when they're being loaded. We need to be far more efficient in the way that we look at those supply infrastructure, and we're still heavily dependent on trucks. which, as you can imagine, is not only an issue for the port, but when you introduce massive truck movements around a city and the reliance on road infrastructure, etc., it creates all sorts of other challenges for us here. We want to and we will continue to grow the Port of Melbourne, but being more efficient around the way that we manage those supply transport links is absolutely key. The other part of that live question, the next part of the focus from a port perspective is, of course, that relationship internationally and what that means for goods. Again, Melbourne, during this time of pandemic, has signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals as the first local government in Australia to embrace them completely as a way of measuring our performance on critical areas and also helping us through that measurement be better at what we're achieving. When you apply the SDGs to a major port like the city, like the Port of Melbourne, we start to understand how many challenges there are, but also how many layers there are to what's being transported around the world, how useful, I don't want to say useful, how valuable they are, how they've been produced, what sort of role we play in that entire procurement and supply chain, and how we can do that better. Absolutely key to us. And look, the last thing I'll comment on, which again is a live discussion, is how can we be more efficient in the port services themselves? A lot of resources required in ports, and each of the operators within our port infrastructure working together well now on different uses of technology to drive more efficiencies in particular, and to make sure that effectively we can remain one of the most competitive and efficient ports in the world.
Well, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I think that there's a very long and very deep conversation that we could be having about the future of cities and ports working together. And it's great to hear the ambitious partnership that you have created already in Melbourne. Let me take you, if I may, to one of the other things for which Melbourne is already famous. Consistently, Melbourne is ranked in one or more of the global rankings as one of, if not the, most livable city in the world. And of course, anyone who's been to Melbourne knows that the amazing quality of life for some there is absolutely enchanting. But how do you create a livability framework that ensures that people who are the most vulnerable, the most poor, perhaps those living in the lowest value housing, actually get to experience this high quality of life themselves? What is it that we can learn from Melbourne about how that great lifestyle can be shared by everyone?
Yeah, well, it's such a fine balance, but we do know they're completely interrelated, and you're an expert on this as well, Greg. It's been an extraordinary actual 3 years for me as Lord Mayor. When I came in, we were one of the most livable cities in the world, and a key feature of that was that we were one of the fastest growing cities in the world, and there was a momentum that went with that. Within this time frame, we now find ourselves needing to really kickstart our economy. We've shifted into trying to manage massive growth to actually creating and stimulating growth, and with that comes the responsibility to do it in the most equitable and fair way possible. And that's not just because it's the right thing to do, but because we know ultimately that's going to have the best outcomes as well for our city. There are some key elements to that livability. One of them literally is people living in our city. In the 80s, Melbourne was described as a moribund city in a rust bucket state. I was a young worker in the city at the time, and I remember wondering, did I have a future in this city at a time when employers and employees were leaving when there was very little culture, and literally there were only hundreds of people living in the city. With some great public policy, we've seen that completely turn on its head. Now we have hundreds of thousands of people living in our municipality, and the role of residents, that economic confidence and underpinning that they bring to our local economy, the workforce and talent that they bring to our city, but also the vibrancy and the dynamic that they bring to our culture and to our society has been a key part of our success. And we did go from virtually no planning mechanisms for residential development to favouring residential development, and that's been a fantastic outcome for us. I guess the focus for us now as we move forward is we still have massive capacity to welcome more people to live in the city, but we need more affordable housing. We are now in a housing shortage crisis for affordable housing, and we know that for key workers, for those that are vulnerable to homelessness, that we have a responsibility to ensure that there is sufficient housing for them. Our success as a city is reliant on having that diversity of people, and so that is a major area of focus for us. And again, we're taking the disruption of COVID to really make sure we're dedicated to progress together with state governments and federal governments on that aspect. The greening of the city we've touched on. I think that's really important. Making sure we have jobs and jobs for the future is what drives our education sector here in Melbourne, but also what we're looking for in terms of reform around the renewables sector and anything that creates what I call green jobs. They are the opportunities of the future, and there's a lot of excitement, particularly from younger people, to think that they can work in industries and sectors that also reflect their ambitions and aspirations for what we want to deliver here in Melbourne and really across the world. So those aspects all need to come together: work, a place to live, and that sense of culture and society, and bringing those together well has made us one of the most livable cities in the world. We're determined to stay there, and now we're really focused on some of those refinements: affordable housing, for example, green jobs, jobs of the future, and looking for a city renaissance through creativity and culture to be able to maintain that mantle of livability. And just the last thing I'd say is that really showing that cities are the best 20-minute neighbourhoods in the world because of people's access to services, work and recreation within walking distance, we think is a really distinctive part of the future of cities.
Well, thank you again, Lord Mayor. It's a very inspiring answer. And of course, many people will know that Melbourne, of course, developed originally the idea of the 15-minute city, the 20-minute neighbourhood, all of these ideas that have now become so vogue. And I see from your answer just how important it is to make sure that that livability is broadly shared and is available to all people who live in the city. And your focus particularly on the homeless seems to me to be a very important part of how you make this work. Now, I want to come to the last question, if we may. The world is going to convene this year at COP26 in Glasgow to address the climate emergency, and cities are going to be at the forefront of this debate about how we can decarbonise and how quickly we can do it and how fully we can do it. Now, I'm keen to know what you think is the contribution that Melbourne is already making to that. How will our cities be different in 5 years' time as a result of this? And what do you need to do to make sure that you take all of those Melbournians with you, that this isn't just an agenda promoted by City Hall, but it's actually something that the people of the city really want and aspire to?
It's such a great question, and at the current environment here in Australia, we have well, we don't have an enormous federal government platform that really provides leadership and guidance on a way forward around climate change responses. I hope I've covered that well. What I would say is that what we're seeing here in Melbourne and other parts of Australia is, in the absence of that federal government policy platform, is literally leadership in action from the bottom up. And I think that's been a really positive element to how Australia really is responding. We've got some fantastic strategies, our climate change and mitigation strategy, for example, our waste and resource recovery strategies that show very thoughtful and deliberate ways forward for our city. We've then accelerated the work under those strategies by declaring a climate and biodiversity emergency in 2019. And that meant that we've put more resources, but we've also pulled our targets forward. For example, a zero carbon city from 2050 has become 2040, and we've got pressure to really go for that much earlier. I feel completely inspired, I've got to say, by our community, because they're the ones really pushing us to show leadership on these issues. So it's as much as how do we bring people with us as how do we keep up with that aspiration that exists and the pressure and the expectations that exist within our community. There's no doubt, though, that at organisation levels, different levels of government and also in the private sector, there is and there can be reticence, there can be a lack of knowledge, there can be a lack of leadership to really take big strides forward. So we see our role as a local government as critical. One, we've got to lead by example, which is why we initiated the Melbourne Renewable Energy Program, a concept in 2017 to reality in 2019, where we brought 13 organisations together to enter a power purchasing agreement for wind energy, which makes 13 major energy users in our municipality 100% renewable electricity. We've now done a second round of that. Those two projects mean that we've knocked off 5% of our carbon emissions from our municipality, not just our organisation, but our municipality. Those steps forward now into community scale batteries within the municipality for us to be able to provide a platform for other organisations to step into renewable energy at scale is another big step forward. So I think that leading by example is really important. It's then to show our leadership by agitating, advocating, pushing, and being part of that bustle of organisations that can make a difference to what our policy looks like. And we do need good policies to be able to guide and support programs and activations to see the sort of change that we need to at scale does rely on policy leadership, and we continue those discussions at a federal level and at a state level. And I think we're seeing those pressures come this way, the push from the bottom up and seeing leadership in action, as well as seeing what we can do to ensure that there's the right policy from top down to provide the resources, the guidance and the push to get us where we need to be as quickly as possible.
Well, thank you, Lord Mayor, for this wonderful answer. And I'm sure that the other city mayors listening will be jealous, as it were, that it's not that they have to take the people of the city with them, but that in your case, you're having to run to catch up with what your citizens want to do. I think it's also absolutely startlingly exciting that you've decided to accelerate Melbourne's journey to net zero a full 10 years faster, and to get there by 2040. Lord Mayor, it's been a real honour to speak to you today. On behalf of the Connected Places Catapult, we want to say thank you very much, and we wish you Godspeed Lord Mayor Sally Capp.